Welcome to your online coffee break, where we discuss bite-sized topics that inspire, educate, and entertain. Here's your host, a software innovator, award-winning marketer, and astronomy and space buff, Chuck Fields.
Hello, thanks for joining me today for your online coffee break. Today I'd like to welcome to the show my special guest, Casey Dreier. Casey is the Chief Advocate and Senior Space Policy Advisor for the Planetary Society, the world's largest independent space outreach organization. Casey is an expert on space and Mars exploration policy, geopolitics, robotic missions to Mars, and the commercialization of space and human spaceflight history. Casey is joining us today to not only discuss his incredible role in space exploration, but also National Geographic's Mars Season 2 TV series.
Online coffee break.
Thanks for joining me today, Casey.
Always happy to be here.
Oh, our pleasure. Now, Casey, you are an expert on space policy. In fact, you're the Director of Space Policy for the Planetary Society. That is the most coolest job title I could ever imagine. How on earth did you get started in that field?
Well, I have an even cooler title right now. I just actually changed it. I'm now the Chief Advocate for the Planetary Society, as well as their Senior Space Policy Advisor. So
nice.
the role is evolving. I get to do even more of what I love, which is talk to folks like you and talk to our members and advocate for space exploration. And, you know, everyone kind of has a different story going into space policy, and mine was unique in that sense as well. I lived in Los Angeles. I was always a fan of the Planetary Society. It's the world's largest nonprofit space organization. Right. And I always wanted to work there. And it was seeing the launch. I actually went to Cape Canaveral, saw the launch of the Mars Curiosity rover. And it was about as moving of a spiritual moment that I've ever had. And I asked myself later that night, why am I not doing everything that I can to make sure that missions like this keep happening? And I had no good answer. And that was the night that I resolved to work at the Planetary Society, moved to Los Angeles, convinced them to hire me, and moved into the policy advocacy outreach role, where I have remained to this day. So it was an unusual and very fortunate series of coincidences that enabled that to happen, but fundamentally came from this very passionate moment of seeing something incredible happen, which I think really unites me and a lot of people who love space together, that feeling of standing in the presence of something greater than yourself, something exciting, and something just truly moving.
Oh, see, I totally agree with you on that. As a matter of fact, I don't know if we could mandate this, but I almost think if every person could witness a rocket launch.
I've thought that exact same thing. I want to start I'd love to start some sort of a fund to send kids and people, maybe even voters, to go down, witness a rocket launch, because it is absolutely spectacular. It's something never to be missed in one's life. And I cannot emphasize it. I every year or two, I try to make sure that I see one just as that spiritual renewal, right? Like working in policy can be frustrating every now and then, right? In politics.
Yes.
And so to see it actually happen, to see the hardware sitting on the pad, to see it launch into space, and to see so many people working together peacefully for this greater purpose of discovery and advancing human knowledge, it's just really inspiring.
I totally agree. Could we all work together like that? It's just so incredible to see. Now, Casey, you are considered one of the big thinkers for National Geographic's Mars series, which just entered its second season. Now, a big thinker, for those of you who haven't seen the series, it actually has a sort of a hybrid fictional version of people actually on Mars in the future, combined with modern day scientists and experts in the fields talking about Mars. And Casey, you're among some pretty good experts, because other big thinkers they have are Elon Musk, Bill Nye, Andy Weir. Wow. So can you give us any details on some of the issues you discussed as a big thinker in season 2?
Well, one of the big conflicts in the show that we talk about is the competition, or at least conflict, that is inherent sometimes between scientific exploration and then resource exploitation. So the desires of business to use the resources from a new area, and the desire of the scientific field to understand and explore those in a very different way. And so that was one of the big conflicts in the show, and that's one of the things that I ended up talking about a lot, that conflict sometimes between the science and the business initiatives or endeavors that, has happened over history and will continue to happen, just because we're humans.
See, I think that's such a good thing because I mean we're so focused sometimes on just getting to Mars. I've been wanting for years. A lot of us have. We're like, why aren't we there yet? We hit the moon almost 50 years ago, which is so hard to believe. And a lot of people that we should be at Mars now. And what I love about the series is it says, well, getting to Mars, that's going to be tough enough. But once we're there, we've got to think about the other things. And when we do have, I love how the series goes into industry coming, and then we have the conflict between, the scientist and the profit business, and how we deal with that. I think that's so incredible in that. For your current policy, space policy that you're into, I know you advocate obviously for exploration. Are you working on policies that would help us adjust to human civilization on Mars or even the moon if we have a moon base before that?
Well, we're really looking at, let's take the first step first, and let's just get us to that point. And there's opportunities to start thinking about of how we'll live, but we can't start to even do that until we were there to live. And so I tend to be pragmatic in that sense. And, it's one of those interesting things. I think what you'll start to see is as humans expand out into the solar system, initially they're going to look a lot like our bases in Antarctica, where they're primarily government funded for the most part, where they're primarily going to be scientists and specialists there for very specific tasks, and they'll be rotating out quite a bit. And so I don't think you will, at least initially, have to face the very tricky and very open-ended questions of how do you self-organize into a semi-independent political unit once you're removed from all of the comforts that you're used to on Earth, not to mention even the ability to buy an apple, let's say, just have a fresh food, or to have, we're so used to this 21st century global economy. Anything I want, I can buy avocados in Canada in January, right? But you can't even get an avocado in sunny days on Mars, because a sunny day on Mars is going to be, topping out at 20 degrees, and there's no air, and there's no water, and there's perchlorates in the soil. So you have a series of issues about how you're going to self-organize, particularly when you're far away. Who is the authority figure? Who can you appeal to for authority? Who can you use as a state? Can the state really impose its will hundreds of millions of miles away? No one really knows yet. So that, this is why I want to let's get to that point, really figure it out. But so we're really focused on, let's take that step and let's just get beyond low Earth orbit, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. I believe in 2015, you led the Planetary Society's Humans Orbiting Mars initiative.
That's correct.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, that was an attempt to say, how can we get to Mars if we accept certain kind of political realities? So Apollo happened because it was very briefly a high national security priority, right? We had to show the world that the Soviets were not the technological powerhouse in the world. We were, and the United States were. We don't have that alignment of national security, national prestige with space anymore. And so if you look at the history ever since Apollo, the budget for NASA varies between, maybe the equivalent of $15 and $25 billion of current day dollars. What can you do? How can you get to Mars, assuming that you're not going to have some massive influx of cash? And the plan that we looked at is really came out of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It was well featured in The Martian and other places around the world, known for its robotic spaceflight, and say, can we make a stepwise path to Mars where everything that we do today is done with an eye on Mars in the future, and we just plod our way through until we end up on Mars in 20 years without requiring massive budget increases. And we believe there's a pathway there. And the first step to that is you orbit at the moon, and then ultimately you orbit at Mars, and then you land at Mars. And you take a very systematic approach where you're always building on your technologies and you're always moving further out.
One thing, by the time this podcast airs, this episode airs, we will have hopefully witnessed Mars InSight landing successfully on Mars. But there still begs that question of when will humans get to Mars? And I know SLS has had delay after delay and budget increases and all that. What are how does your space policies fit with like SLS and actually getting humans to Mars in a certain time frame?
Well, it really comes down from the top. And again, we've seen this again and again in space history. Going back to Apollo, again, somewhat of an aberration. But what happened was you had a strong presidential declaration and then immediately a strong congressional support, and the money began to show up almost right away. And they had the resources and an alignment and a clear goal that enabled them to pursue a successful mission. Ever since then, particularly in human spaceflight at NASA, you have not seen the clear political alignment that says this is the goal and it's shared beyond the White House, it's shared in Congress. That needs to happen, I think, before we really start getting to Mars. The technological issues are solvable issues, right? Like there's no technical reason why we can't start going to Mars today. It's a purely political problem. And that's not a fun problem for a lot of people to solve because politics aren't always the most fun to engage in because it's ultimately a human endeavor. Humans can be very frustrating people to work with. And however, ultimately, when you do have a political alignment, it can be extremely powerful. And it's building that support, building the coalitions, and building really the broader public consensus that this is an important investment by a nation. This is an important investment by the world. And this is an important opportunity, not only for scientific discovery, but for peaceful cooperation efforts and returns in terms of international diplomacy. And that's where Mars really stretches beyond kind of the impact of just having humans on Mars. It's bringing us together in the effort of going. And that's something really rare to have.
It is, and I commend you for being, in space policy. This is what you do, because to me, it is amazing on the political front. It would be so frustrating to, we have certain programs that we have in place, like the Constellation program, and then that gets canceled, and then other programs come. And it would be hard for NASA, who has to set this long-term vision, and to have to deal with the politics of changing administrations. And I guess, is that what you kind of do in terms of the Planetary Society and space policy? Is you come in and try to keep them focused on sort of that goal?
Yeah, exactly. We firmly believe at the Planetary Society that space is for everybody. And that's whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican, libertarian, independent, any sort of self-identity, space has a place for you. And one of the actually very beautiful things about Congress, it's one of I'd say one of the more redeeming aspects, is that there is a broad fondness and support for NASA in the political parties. It's one of the very few remaining nonpartisan areas of Congress and government. And we really want to keep it that way, right? Because ultimately, you're going to have changes in Congress. You're going to have changes in the White House. So the only way to succeed, if you're pursuing a multi-decade effort that is expensive, difficult, challenging, so forth, you have to have broad buy-in from everybody, and you have to see the value. And that's one of the things I think that we work to do. We actually helped found a caucus in Congress this year called the Planetary Science Caucus, which is devoted to exploration of the planets, search for life. And it was led by a Democrat and a Republican in the House, a Democrat and a Republican in the Senate. We have something like 35 members of both parties to support these types of endeavors. It's a matter of organizing, and it's a matter of communicating effectively. And this is the role of every one of your listeners. You can talk to your representative in Congress. You have the opportunity to share how important this is with them, so they understand that this is something to prioritize at some level, or at least not undermine. And that's a critical role that every citizen can play.
Oh, absolutely. And I love the role of the Planetary Society in that. One thing, I'd like to kind of switch gears because I love the projects that you're working on. And one of the projects is a citizen-funded project called Lightsail 2. I was wondering if you can just tell us a little bit more about that one.
The Lightsail 2 is the sequel. It's really the first. It's a couple years ago, we did a demonstration project of what if you took a very small spacecraft, and when you have very small spacecraft, obviously you don't have a lot of room for things in them. What's something you can't shrink down is fuel, right? Fuel is just it's a liquid. So how do you move around in space? Well, you can use the sun. And just like a sailboat in the wind can tack in and out of the wind and move all around, you can use the solar wind and solar pressure from light from the sun, can tack in and out of it. If you deploy a large enough solar sail, you can fly around in space for effectively free, right? You don't need to bring as much fuel. You can just use the sun, right? It's always the nice thing about space. It's always sunny there, right? There's no clouds to block you. And so what if we shrink this down into what's called a CubeSat, a very small spacecraft? You could use these to, there's functionally limitless energy, at least in the solar system, to use these solar sails with. So Lightsail 2 is completely citizen funded. We're going to be launching on the next Falcon Heavy rocket, which is just awesome in and of itself, whenever that launches. And it's going to demonstrate true solar sailing and a truly independent effort to explore space and to demonstrate new technologies. And then we intend to help spread that technology and share it with others so they can start using it to get further and further into space.
Well, I cannot wait. And you mentioned it's launching aboard, the SpaceX Falcon Heavy, which I'm sure all of us remember. Just the first Falcon Heavy, just earlier this year, launching the wonderful Starman into past Mars
I felt
orbit,
like I
which
was
is
10 years old again watching that. That was spectacular.
I did too. Wasn't that great? Were you as glued to the TV watching it on YouTube as I was? I could not take my eyes off it. I thought it was incredible.
I believe I yelped when they both landed at the same time. I yelled out loud. I couldn't help myself. I was very excited.
You're not the only one, Casey. That's for sure. Now, I want to switch gears one more time because this is a question that some of my listeners keep coming up with, and I don't know a lot about it, but it's this Space Force that the current administration has talked about. There's lots of talk going on about that. What does the Space Force look like, in your opinion?
Well, it's a name that sounds far more evocative than the actual reality. So right now you have two space programs in the United States. You have NASA, and then you have the National Defense, National Security space efforts. And those are functionally different. Mm-hmm. And we actually spend in the United States more money on the national security side of space than NASA if you had them all together. So in the Department of Defense, in the Pentagon, the Air Force is generally responsible for most space activities. And these are generally, some spying, communications, the GPS network, early missile warning launch systems and so forth. It's mainly observation. And the idea is with Space Force is that you carve out activity from the Air Force and move it into its own equal branch of the armed services. And that would allow those people in that branch to more effectively internally advocate for their needs, to really truly focus on space-based national security issues, space-based detection of potential threats, and to just basically it's a statement more than anything functionally changing. It's not going to be, Space Marines getting dropped in with laser blasters anywhere. That's not
Sure.
what it is at all. It's actually a somewhat quite boring bureaucratic reshuffling of the Pentagon that has a very exciting name and could cost anywhere from $4 to $13 billion just to move things around.
Wow.
You add a lot more staff. You have much more bureaucracy, basically. And, but it's not necessarily a bad idea either. There are strong arguments for it. There's arguments against it. And it's not as cut and dry as a lot of the media coverage has made it sound. And it'll be interesting to see how this goes forward now in this new Democrat-run House of Representatives.
Yeah, so I guess one question I had too is it just for defending us against other, entities on the Earth, or do you think it'd be combined with our near Earth asteroid protection that we're currently doing? Is it totally separate than that? More military than?
Yeah, it would be completely separate. Okay. And as much as I would love the Pentagon to take over the funding responsibilities from NASA, because it's easier for them to get money than NASA.
Yes.
NASA is currently the lead agency responsible for asteroid detection, deflection, and organization within the government about disaster response to a planetary defense. They call that planetary defense. So it's got somewhat of a confusing name in that sense. But NASA is the lead agency on that. Pentagon is much more prosaic issues facing potential threats from China, Russia, and others.
Okay. Well, thanks for clearing that up for me. I do appreciate that, because I certainly want to see us go forward on exploration where we can go. And of course, I want the Earth to be protected on that. Now, you help educate the public, Casey, about space policy through your blog. And I love your monthly space policy edition of the Planetary Radio podcast. What else can our audience do to help advocate for space and or support the Planetary Society?
Well, obviously, my boss would fire me if I didn't say that you should join as a member of the Planetary Society. Well, because it's actually really important. The Planetary Society is the only independent, and independent means we're funded just by people like you. Around the world, we have 55,000 members who choose to pay to be members. It's $4 a month starting. It's very easy. It's a cup of coffee a month. And that money allows us to say what we feel, to give the most honest appraisal of all of these issues that we just talked about, and also to represent you functionally in Washington, D.C., and to basically be that voice for you without having any corporate interest tell us what to do. That independence comes with the price that we need members to exist. And so join as a member at planetary.org. And then I also have, if you want to really step up your space kind of politics and policy game, I just released a free online course at courses.planetary.org all about space advocacy. It's called Space Advocacy 101. And it's meant for beginners. You can learn all about how Congress works, how to be a more effective space advocate, how to read the NASA budget. It really brings you up to speed and makes you incredibly effective as an advocate. And you can learn all about that at courses.planetary.org.
Oh, excellent. Well, Casey, this is some great information. Again, I want to thank you for just being part of the National Geographic Mars series, for all of your space policy work that you do at the Planetary Society, and thank you so much for taking time out of your hugely busy schedule to join us today. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Online coffee break.
Wow, I really enjoyed my conversation with Casey today. Hope you did too. If you'd like to support or find out more about the Planetary Society, just go to their website, planetary.org. Also, hope you're following along with the National Geographic Mars Season 2 TV series. It's fantastic. If you'd like to learn more about that series, just go to their website, nationalgeographic.com. I want to thank Casey for joining us today. I want to thank your audience for joining us today as well. If you'd like to comment on today's topic, just go to our website, onlinecoffeebreak.com. Leave a comment there. You can also call us at 317-862-4700. Leave a comment there. Who knows, we just might play it on the air. We'd also love it if you'd follow us on Instagram at Online Coffee Break. We'd also appreciate it if you'd rate us on iTunes or just share this episode with a friend. Thank you so much for joining us today. See you next time. God bless.